On the western edge of South America, nestled between the Earth's driest desert, the vast expanse of the largest rainforest, and the towering peaks of the second highest mountain range, once lay an extraordinary empire, the Inca. Through remarkable engineering feats and meticulous central planning, the Inca created one of the world's most distinctive empires. It was the largest civilization in pre-Columbian America, uniquely characterized by its lack of essential tools like a written language, the wheel, or currency. Rather than expanding across flat land, the Inca Empire grew vertically, thriving in the Andes Mountains. This exploration is about the Incas' rise to power, from their mysterious beginnings to their domination of an entire region. When Christopher Columbus landed in the Americas in 1492, he had no idea that approximately 2,000 kilometers away, a vibrant empire sprawled over 2 million square kilometers, Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters, or as the Inca called their realm. This immense territory included modern-day Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. The empire boasted a population exceeding 10 million, comprised of numerous ethnic groups speaking different languages. One of the most astonishing aspects of the Inca Empire is that it developed in near isolation. Their culture lacked many elements essential to Old World civilizations. They had no wheel, and their only domesticated animals were llamas and alpacas, which couldn't pull heavy loads. Steel and iron were unknown, yet the Inca were masterful in working gold, silver, and bronze, which they used to craft tools, ornaments, and religious artifacts. Even more intriguingly, the Inca had no written language. Instead, they relied on oral tradition and a sophisticated system of knotted cords known as quipu to transmit information. These knots were used for recording data, keeping tax records, measuring resources, and conducting censuses. Unfortunately, when the Spanish conquered the Inca, the knowledge of reading quipu quickly vanished, leaving the records indecipherable to modern historians. As a result, much of what we know about the Inca comes from the accounts of Spanish chroniclers or surviving oral traditions. One fascinating fact about the quipu is that it wasn't just a tool for accounting. Some historians believe that certain quipus may have held more complex information, such as narratives or histories, making them an advanced alternative to written scripts. Concerning the beginnings of this extraordinary empire, ancient Peru was one of the significant centers of civilization. Between 8,000 and 3,000 BC, the region's inhabitants domesticated llamas and alpacas, vital for transportation and wool, and cultivated a wide variety of crops that would sustain their society. Among the most important were potatoes, corn, beans, peanuts, squash, and quinoa, a highly nutritious grain that remains a staple in modern diets. From these early agricultural communities, several sophisticated cultures arose, each contributing to the Inca's future success. The Tiwanaku, Wari, and Chimu civilizations, in particular, laid the groundwork for what would eventually become the Inca Empire. Tiwanaku, known for its impressive stone structures and religious influence, is thought to have inspired the Incas' architectural and ceremonial practices. The Wari civilization, which predated the Inca, had a centralized government and expansive road system, both of which the Inca would later refine. Meanwhile, the Chimu, based on Peru's northern coast, were renowned for their advanced metalworking techniques and urban planning, influencing the Incas' economic and administrative strategies. A lesser-known but fascinating fact is that the Incas' advanced agricultural methods allowed them to thrive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Their terraced fields, known as andines, were not only practical for farming on steep mountain slopes, but they also helped prevent soil erosion and allowed them to cultivate diverse crops at varying altitudes. This ingenuity ensured food security and contributed to the empire's rapid expansion. With these early influences and innovations, the stage was set for the rise of the Inca, an empire that would soon eclipse its predecessors in size, sophistication, and sheer resilience. By 900 AD, civilizations like Tiwanaku were already flourishing, constructing massive stone structures, building highways and canals, and supporting a capital city of 50,000 people. Remarkably advanced for their time, especially considering London's population was only around 30,000. This was all achieved at an impressive altitude of 3,000 meters above sea level, a feat that required remarkable ingenuity and adaptation to the harsh environment. The Inca, as the final great society to emerge from this region, inherited much from these earlier cultures. At the height of the Chimu Empire to the north, the small and relatively unknown kingdom of Cusco lay dormant to the south. This tiny kingdom would soon undergo a dramatic transformation, expanding into Tahuantinsuyu, the Inca Empire. But where did the Inca come from? To understand this, we can look at the Incas' own mythical origin story. According to legend, it all began with the great creator god Viracocha, who discovered 3 caves. From the central cave, Viracocha brought forth 4 brothers and 4 sisters, the founders of the Inca civilization. From the 2 side caves, other people emerged who would form the basis of the less prominent Inca clans. The most notable of the brothers was Ayar Manco, who carried with him a golden staff. This staff, believed to have magical properties, was used to test the soil during their exodus-like journey in search of a place to settle. According to the myth, Ayar Manco's brothers perished one by one, leaving him as the sole survivor. When they finally reached the valley of Cusco, the golden staff sank into the ground, a divine sign that they had found their new home. Ayar Manco then took the name Manco Capac and founded the city of Cusco. Interestingly, this origin myth, while fantastical, served a deeper political purpose. The story was often modified to suit the changing needs of the Inca rulers. For example, when the empire sought to conquer new territories, the mythology would conveniently evolve to incorporate these newly annexed regions. The conquered state or ethnic group would suddenly find itself connected to the Inca mythos, making integration into the empire smoother. In essence, the Incas used their myths not only as spiritual tales, but also as tools of political control. While the myth of Manco Capac and the golden staff is well known, many historians believe that he may have been based on a real historical figure. Manco Capac was likely the leader of a nomadic tribe that settled in the Cusco Valley in the early 13th century, marking the beginning of what would eventually grow into one of the most formidable empires in history. Cusco's early development was designed in the shape of a puma, a sacred animal in Inca culture. This symbolic layout reflected the Incas' belief in the spiritual connection between the natural world and their civilization. The head of the puma was formed by Sacsayhuaman, a massive fortress that still stands today as a testament to the architectural prowess of the Inca. In the early days of Cusco, the city was not yet the bustling hub of a great empire. It began as a modest settlement of mud brick houses and small temples. However, over time, as the Inca began to consolidate power and expand their influence, Cusco grew into a grand city of stone palaces, temples, and plazas, becoming the beating heart of the Inca Empire. It was here that the Sapa Inca, or emperor, ruled with absolute authority, believed to be the divine descendant of the sun god, Inti. This blend of myth, political strategy, and historical development set the foundation for the meteoric rise of the Inca, a civilization that would soon become synonymous with the Andes. The early history of the first 8 Inca kings is largely shrouded in myth and legend, their stories lost to time. However, it is with the 9th king that we enter the realm of recorded history. This king, often compared to Alexander the Great, was named Kusi Yupanqui, though he is better known by the title he adopted later, Pachacuti, meaning earth-shaker, or he who turns the world upside down. Born in the early 1400s, Pachacuti ascended to power under dramatic circumstances, transforming the small kingdom of Cusco into the vast and powerful Inca Empire. At the time of Pachacuti's birth, Cusco was little more than a modest chiefdom. He wasn't even first in line to inherit the throne. However, when Cusco was besieged by 40,000 Chanca warriors, his father, the reigning king, and his brother, the heir, fled in the face of this overwhelming force. It was Kusi Yupanqui who rallied the city's defenses, leading a heroic stand that not only saved Cusco, but won him the crown. His decisive leadership in this time of crisis set him on the path to greatness, and under his reign, the Inca Empire would expand from a small territory around Cusco to encompass lands stretching from modern-day Bolivia to Ecuador. One of Pachacuti's most innovative strategies was his use of espionage to gather intelligence on neighboring states. He would send spies to assess their military strength, resources, and vulnerabilities. With this knowledge in hand, Pachacuti would send envoys to the leaders of these states, offering them the opportunity to join the Inca Empire peacefully. The terms of this arrangement were tempting. The local rulers would retain their positions and power, while their lands would be showered with riches and luxury goods, on the condition that they submitted to Inca rule. If these rulers agreed, their heirs were sent to Cusco, where they were educated in the Inca way of life, adopting Inca customs and culture. Once they were fully indoctrinated, these heirs would return to their native lands to rule as loyal vassals of the Inca Empire. However, if the offer was refused, Pachacuti did not hesitate to unleash his massive multi-ethnic army, which was highly organized and formidable in battle. The Inca military machine, built under Pachacuti's leadership, could raise hundreds of thousands of soldiers and move them efficiently across rugged Andean terrain. Pachacuti also implemented sweeping administrative reforms, reorganizing the kingdom of Cusco into what became known as Tahuantinsuyu, meaning the land of four quarters. The empire was divided into four regions, or suyus, each governed by provincial officials who reported directly to the central government in Cusco. This federalist system ensured that the empire was tightly controlled from its center, while also allowing for regional governance. Cusco itself was transformed into a grand imperial city under Pachacuti's reign. He ordered the city to be paved with expertly cut stone, creating a majestic capital befitting the empire's new status. From Cusco, a vast network of highways radiated outward, connecting the four suyus and facilitating the movement of armies, goods, and people across the empire. These highways were a remarkable feat of engineering, spanning thousands of kilometers and crossing some of the most challenging terrain on Earth. Among Pachacuti's many construction projects, one of the most famous is Machu Picchu, a royal estate perched high in the mountains at an altitude of 2,430 meters. Though it remained unknown to the Spanish conquerors and the outside world for centuries, Machu Picchu stands today as one of the most iconic symbols of Inca engineering and architectural prowess. A particularly interesting aspect of Inca imperialism was their approach to integrating conquered peoples. Unlike the Aztecs, who often left their tributary states relatively autonomous, the Inca sought to fully incorporate new territories into their empire. Conquered people were not only taxed and conscripted, but were also expected to adopt Inca customs and governance structures. This practice of integration helped create a more cohesive and stable empire, even as its borders expanded. By the time Pachacuti's grandson, Huayna Capac, ascended the throne, the Inca had conquered nearly all the land that was worth conquering. Militarily, they were extremely well organized, using a decimal system to structure their army. Units were grouped in sizes of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, allowing for flexible deployment depending on the needs of a particular campaign. Each able-bodied man between the ages of 25 and 50 received military training, and the state ensured that no province was overburdened by military conscription. Additionally, soldiers were regularly rotated out of long campaigns so they could return home and tend to their families and lands, maintaining social stability, a practice that set them apart from other empires of the time. Under Pachacuti's leadership, the Inca Empire not only expanded rapidly, but also laid the groundwork for a powerful and centralized state that would endure long after his death. His strategic brilliance, military innovations, and administrative reforms turned the Inca from a small kingdom into the largest empire in pre-Columbian America. The Incas' military success and resilience can be partly attributed to their unique armor and weaponry, which were well adapted to their environment. Unlike European steel armor, the Inca relied on armor made from thick layers of alpaca wool and cotton. These tunics were remarkably effective at stopping projectiles, including arrows. In fact, Spanish soldiers fighting the Inca found these woolen tunics so useful that they began wearing them as well. After battles, there were reports of Spanish troops returning looking like porcupines, with arrows stuck in their armor, but without fatal injuries. In addition to their tunics, the Inca also wore helmets made of similar materials, and they carried large wooden shields on their backs. These shields were crafted from hardwoods sourced from the Inca jungle provinces, areas rich in natural resources. A lighter, smaller shield was worn on the arm, which had an attached cape that could be used to protect the wearer's legs from incoming arrows or sling stones. This combination of armor, though primitive compared to European plate armor, was effective for the kind of combat the Inca faced in the Andean highlands. The Inca military, being as diverse as the empire itself, utilized a wide range of weapons. Soldiers from different provinces brought their unique skills and weaponry to the battlefield. For example, men recruited from the jungle provinces were known for their skill with bows, while others preferred dart throwers and slings, the latter being a common and highly effective weapon among the Inca. Inca slingers were so accurate and powerful that their stones could shatter bones and penetrate Spanish armor. The Inca also had a range of melee weapons, including spears, axes, clubs, star-headed maces, and halberds. These weapons were often made from stone, bronze, or even bone, as metallurgy in the Andes did not progress to the production of iron and steel. Another unique weapon in the Inca arsenal was the boleadoras, or bolas, a type of weapon consisting of multiple stones tied together with a rope. When thrown, the stones would wrap around an enemy's legs, making it an effective tool for immobilizing soldiers on foot, or, later, even Spanish cavalry. This versatility in weaponry allowed the Inca to adapt to different battle conditions and enemies, helping them rapidly expand their empire. However, military conquest alone wasn't enough to maintain control over such a vast and diverse empire. In just under 100 years, the Inca created the largest empire in the Americas, stretching along the spine of South America. But ruling an empire of over 10 million people across such a wide range of environments, from the arid coasts to the high Andes, posed unique challenges, particularly in feeding their population and maintaining political unity. One of the most impressive feats of the Inca Empire was its ability to transform a harsh and inhospitable landscape into an agricultural marvel. Much of the Inca heartland lies at altitudes of 3,000 meters, about 10,000 feet, above sea level. This high-altitude environment is characterized by thin, rocky soils, low rainfall, and freezing temperatures that can occur at any time of year. Yet, despite these difficult conditions, the Inca managed to feed a population of millions. The secret to their agricultural success lay in their ability to harness the ecological variety that existed across the various altitudes of their empire. British historian Felipe Fernandez Armesto has called the Inca the most impressive empire builders of their day due to their ability to adapt to these extreme environments. Anthropologist John Murrah also observed that the Inca heartland was unique in that nowhere else on Earth had millions of people lived for so long in such difficult circumstances, thriving in a region where temperatures could drop below freezing in every month of the year. This rugged Andean landscape, however, offered one distinct advantage. Its dramatic changes in altitude created enormous ecological diversity. Within a relatively short distance, the Inca could access a wide range of microclimates, each capable of producing different crops. This allowed them to cultivate everything from potatoes and maize in the highlands to tropical fruits in the lowlands, all within a few hundred kilometers. Inca farmers developed terraces carved into the mountainsides to make the most of the limited arable land. These terraces not only created more space for agriculture, but also helped to prevent soil erosion and retain moisture. Crops were grown on these terraces according to the altitude, with different levels dedicated to specific crops based on the temperature and growing conditions at that height. The Inca also created an extensive system of irrigation canals that allowed them to bring water to their terraces, further enhancing their agricultural productivity. These canals, some of which stretched for many kilometers, demonstrated the Incas' advanced understanding of engineering and hydrology. The Inca society also had a deep respect for the dead, to the point that corpses played an active role in politics long after death. The mummified bodies of past rulers were treated as living beings, participating in important state ceremonies, receiving offerings, and even being consulted on matters of governance. These mummies, known as malki, were carried out of their tombs for festivals, dressed in fine clothing, and given food and drink. The influence of the dead on the living was so significant that past rulers could still exert power through their descendants, controlling large estates and wealth long after their physical death. The Inca not only built an empire in a land of extremes, but also developed a culture that was highly attuned to both the practical and spiritual needs of their people. Their ability to adapt to their environment, combined with their respect for both the living and the dead, allowed the Inca to maintain one of the most impressive and enduring empires in the history of the Americas. The Inca used the diverse ecological zones of their empire to create an ingenious agricultural system that helped safeguard against famine. Since the Inca Empire spanned a wide range of altitudes and environments, they took advantage of the variety in crops that could be grown at different levels. For instance, potatoes and quinoa were cultivated in the highlands, while maize and tropical fruits were grown in the lower valleys. This strategy ensured that if one region suffered from drought or a crop disease, other regions could compensate, reducing the risk of widespread famine. The Inca also stored surplus food in state-controlled warehouses, a vital part of their food security strategy. These storage facilities, known as kolkhoz, were spread across the empire and filled with preserved crops such as potatoes, maize, and quinoa. One of the most innovative preservation methods was the development of chuño, a freeze-dried potato that could last for years. By exposing potatoes to the freezing temperatures of the Andean night and then drying them out in the sun, the Inca created a reliable and long-lasting food source. This freeze-drying process allowed the potatoes to be stored in the warehouses for long periods, providing a critical buffer against food shortages caused by natural disasters. Unlike many other civilizations, the Inca did not rely on animals such as oxen or horses for farming. Llamas, while excellent for transporting goods, were not strong enough to pull plows. As a result, all farming in the Inca Empire was done by hand. Despite this, the Incas' agricultural productivity was remarkable. They developed a cooperative system of labor, where large groups of people would work together to plow and cultivate fields. This method was much faster than individual farming, and it became a fundamental aspect of Indian culture. This system of reciprocity, known as Aini, extended beyond farming to all aspects of Inca society, fostering a sense of communal responsibility and cooperation. In times of famine, the Inca redistributed food and resources to ensure that everyone was taken care of, especially widows, the sick, and the elderly. People who were unable to work were supported by their communities, and their lands were worked for them. This collective approach to survival was essential in the harsh environment of the Andes, where total cooperation was necessary to ensure the smooth functioning of society. One of the most unique aspects of Inca civilization was the complete absence of a market economy. Unlike other major civilizations, the Inca functioned almost entirely without money. There were no markets or currency exchanges in Inca society. Instead, the central government controlled the production, storage, and distribution of goods. All citizens contributed food, tools, and clothing to state-owned warehouses, from which they could receive what they needed. The state managed the distribution of resources so effectively that people had little need for personal wealth or trade. Taxes were not collected in the form of money or goods, as there was no currency in the empire. Instead, the Inca imposed taxes in the form of labor through a system known as mita. Every citizen was required to contribute labor to the state for a certain period each year. This labor tax allowed the government to mobilize large numbers of workers for important projects, such as building roads, constructing monumental architecture, and farming state lands. The mita system was one of the key factors that enabled the Inca to maintain such a vast empire. Workers could be relocated across the empire to focus on high-priority tasks, such as mining, textile production, and construction. The system allowed for the efficient organization of labor, and because it was seen as a communal duty rather than exploitation, it contributed to the social cohesion of the empire. While the absence of markets and money in the Inca Empire may seem strange to modern perspectives, this system of centralized control, communal responsibility, and labor taxation was highly effective in creating a stable and functioning society in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. The success of this system, however, would ultimately face a severe challenge with the arrival of the Spanish, whose worldview and approach to economics and labor were drastically different. The Inca were able to complete massive architectural and infrastructural projects during their relatively short 100-year reign, a feat largely due to their efficient use of labor, resources, and the natural environment. Central to their ability to build monumental works was their relationship with llamas and alpacas, the only large domesticated animals in the Andes. These animals were invaluable to Inca society, not only for their ability to carry goods across long distances, but also for the essential resources they provided. Alpacas produced wool, which was woven into cloth, a resource of immense importance to the Incas. Inca cloth was far more than just a means of clothing. It was a fundamental part of the economy and social order. Fine cloth, known as kumbi, was a symbol of prestige and status. The emperor would often gift well-made cloth to people who pleased him, using it as a means to reward loyalty or service. The government even regulated the distribution of outfits to the people, ensuring that social ranks were visually reinforced through textiles. Each province was given control of state-owned herds of llamas and alpacas and tasked with producing a specific amount of cloth each year. The production from these herds was stored in the Inca warehouses, or colcas, ensuring that there was always a reserve for when it was needed. The Inca built these warehouses all along their extensive highway system, with one placed approximately every 22 kilometers. This system was designed in response to the difficulties of moving goods over the Andean landscape, where there were no navigable rivers or large draft animals to help with transportation. The warehouses were strategically located so that goods could be transported by foot over manageable distances, ensuring a steady supply of resources throughout the empire. These storage facilities were particularly crucial for the Inca army, allowing soldiers to march across the realm without being weighed down by provisions. Armies could pick up weapons and supplies at the nearest warehouse, a system that made their military campaigns more efficient. One of the most essential components of the Inca Empire's success was its remarkable system of highways. These roads extended for over 40,000 kilometers, traversing the difficult terrain of the Andes. The construction of these highways was an engineering marvel, often requiring roads to be carved into the sides of mountains. To cross deep valleys and gorges, the Inca built suspension bridges made from woven grass that could support the weight of people and animals. The bridges were terrifying to cross, but crucial for maintaining connectivity throughout the empire. Along these highways were relay stations called tambos, where runners known as chasqui were stationed. These runners, the fastest men from nearby villages, acted as messengers. They would carry messages, gifts, or quipus, knotted cords used for record keeping, from one station to the next. This system was incredibly efficient, allowing information to travel vast distances quickly. In fact, messages could be sent up to 392 kilometers in a single day, outpacing even the Roman Empire, which relied on mounted messengers and could only cover about 320 kilometers in a day. This swift communication network allowed the emperor and his officials to maintain control over the vast empire. In addition to the highways, the Inca undertook massive agricultural projects to increase productivity in their challenging environment. They built terraces on the mountainsides to create arable land, where there had previously been none. These terraces, supported by retaining walls and filled with layers of gravel, sand, and soil, not only captured water that would otherwise flow down the mountains, but also prevented flooding and helped retain heat from the sun. The heat absorbed by the stones during the day kept the crops warm during the cold nights, preventing them from freezing. At the height of the Inca Empire in the 16th century, more than 1 million hectares of terraces were in use. This system of terraced agriculture allowed the Inca to feed their growing population, despite the fact that only 2% of their land was naturally suitable for farming. Their ability to transform such a harsh environment into an agricultural powerhouse was a testament to their ingenuity and determination. The Inca were also renowned for their stonework, which remains one of the most impressive aspects of their legacy. Using only stone tools and ropes, they quarried, shaped, and moved enormous rocks to build their cities and fortifications. Their stone constructions, such as the walls of Sacsayhuaman, were built without the use of mortar. Instead, the stones were perfectly cut to fit together like puzzle pieces, with such precision that not even a pin could slip between the joints. This technique also made their buildings highly earthquake-resistant, a necessity in the seismic region of the Andes. The Incas' belief in the connection between the living and the dead took on a unique form with their practice of mummification. The Inca mummies, known as malki, were not merely embalmed bodies lying in tombs. They were considered active participants in the lives of their descendants. Only members of influential families were mummified, and these mummies were treated as if they were still alive, cared for in ways that would seem extraordinary to us today. They were regularly fed, dressed in fine clothes, and consulted in critical life decisions. The Inca believed that these mummies could protect their families, ensure fertile lands, and even maintain a steady water supply. The mummies of Inca rulers received even more extraordinary levels of care and reverence. These royal mummies were preserved with such precision that long after the empire had fallen, the Spanish found people still worshiping them. The dead rulers remained powerful figures in Inca society, holding control over their estates, wealth, and influence. What is most unusual to us is that, for the Inca, mummies were not dead. They were living beings who continued to wield power. This practice of treating mummies as living beings had profound implications for the political and economic structure of the Inca Empire. Unlike in many other civilizations, where the wealth of a deceased ruler would pass on to their successor, in the Inca Empire, the wealth of a dead emperor was managed by their panasa, or royal family group, which was tasked with maintaining the mummy. The new emperor could not inherit the wealth, land, or estates of his predecessor. This led to a unique dynamic in which each new emperor had to quickly expand the empire through conquests and construction projects in order to secure his own wealth and power. The most fertile lands around Cusco, the heart of the empire, were often under the control of deceased rulers and their panacas, forcing new emperors to look further afield for resources and wealth. This system of panacas managing dead rulers' wealth spurred rapid territorial expansion, but also created intense competition among the royal family groups. The rivalry between panacas was so ruthless and intense that it rivaled the political machinations of any European court. In fact, the competition among these royal factions was so fierce that Machiavelli himself would have been impressed, and the Medici family might have taken notes on their strategies. When the Spanish arrived, they astutely exploited these divisions, using the competing families against one another to weaken the empire from within. Despite the vast achievements of the Inca Empire, the monumental buildings, the advanced agricultural systems, and the welfare state that ensured no one went hungry, the empire was not without its internal strife. Revolts were a common occurrence, especially among the recently conquered ethnic groups whose loyalties were often fickle. The Inca rulers had to spend much of their reigns quelling these uprisings, and no emperor dealt with more revolts than Huayna Capac, who ruled during a period of intense territorial expansion. While he is remembered for his efforts to pacify newly conquered regions, he is perhaps better known as the first Inca emperor to die of smallpox, a disease brought by the Europeans that would devastate the native populations of the Americas. Huayna Capac's death in 1528 was a turning point for the empire. His passing triggered a massive civil war between his sons, Atahualpa and Huáscar, just as the Spanish were beginning to encroach on Inca territory. This internal conflict, combined with the devastating effects of smallpox, left the empire vulnerable to outside forces. While these events were unfolding in the high Andes, far to the north, in Europe, tales of conquest and unimaginable riches were spreading. Hernán Cortés had just returned from Mexico, where he had conquered the mighty Aztec Empire, bringing with him vast amounts of gold, silver, and other treasures. He presented these spoils to Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain, impressing the royal court with his tales of conquest and wealth. At the same time, another veteran of the New World, Francisco Pizarro, was preparing to make his mark on history. Pizarro, a second cousin of Cortés, had also heard of the riches of the Americas and had his sights set on the land of Peru, home to the Inca Empire. In July of 1529, Pizarro arranged to meet with King Charles V to seek permission to embark on a conquest of his own. Like Cortés before him, Pizarro brought with him gifts of gold, silver, and exotic goods from the Andes, as well as native peoples and creatures unknown in Europe, all intended to impress the king. Pizarro assured Charles that the Empire of Peru could be conquered in his name, and that the wealth of the Inca would surpass even that of the Aztecs. Thus began the final chapter in the story of the Inca Empire, the collision between two vastly different worlds, the Spanish conquistadors armed with steel weapons and gunpowder, and the Inca, masters of the high Andes, was about to begin. In the years that followed, the Inca Empire would face its greatest challenge yet, a foreign invasion that would unravel its centuries-old traditions, its monumental achievements, and its very existence as an empire. The stage was set for a historical confrontation between Francisco Pizarro and the Inca rulers, a clash that would reverberate through the Andes and beyond, changing the course of history forever. With the royal license granted to him, Francisco Pizarro was named the governor of Peru and given permission to conquer this mysterious and wealthy new land. Armed with the official endorsement of the Spanish crown, Pizarro set out to assemble a group of conquistadors who would join him in his quest. He returned to his hometown of Trujillo and gathered his four brothers, Juan, Francisco, Gonzalo, and Hernando, along with a band of eager adventurers. In January 1530, they set sail for the Americas, ready to face the challenges and rewards that lay ahead. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Inca Empire, disaster was unfolding. Huayna Capac had recently completed the conquest of much of what is now Ecuador, but reports began arriving that strange men had been seen trading in the northern city of Tumbes. Alongside these reports came even more alarming news. A deadly disease was spreading through the empire, killing thousands. The Inca, who had never encountered such a plague, were completely unprepared for the devastation it wrought. This sickness, which we now know as smallpox, had been brought to the Americas by earlier European explorers and settlers. It spread across the continent, arriving in Inca territory just before Pizarro. The disease ravaged the population, wiping out entire villages and weakening the empire long before the Spanish set foot in Peru. By 1527, the epidemic had claimed the lives of millions of Inca, including Huayna Capac and his heir, Ninan Cuyochi. The deaths of both the emperor and his chosen successor threw the empire into a succession crisis, setting the stage for a brutal civil war. Two of Huayna Capac's surviving sons, Atahualpa and Huáscar, both laid claim to the throne, and their rivalry divided the empire. Atahualpa, based in the northern city of Quito, controlled his father's veteran legions, and slowly began to push south toward Cusco, where Huáscar ruled. The war raged for years, devastating the empire even further as brother fought brother for control. In 1532, the conflict reached its bloody climax. Atahualpa's forces, bolstered by his experienced generals, smashed Huáscar's remaining armies just outside of Cusco, capturing Huáscar and securing victory. Atahualpa, camped over 900 kilometers away in the northern town of Cajamarca, awaited news of the battle. The Inca had an exceptional system of highways and runners, called chasqui, who tirelessly carried messages across the vast empire. Still, it took 5 days for word of Atahualpa's victory to reach him in Cajamarca. Upon hearing the news of his brother's defeat, Atahualpa began making plans for his coronation as the supreme ruler of the Inca world. He was eager to march to Cusco, consolidate his power, and officially assume the title of Sapa Inca. However, Atahualpa's plans were soon interrupted by reports of a strange group of foreigners. A small band of just 168 Spaniards, some of whom were riding what the Inca described as giant llamas, horses, a creature unknown to the Inca, was causing trouble in the Andean highlands. These Spaniards were now marching toward Cajamarca. Atahualpa was curious rather than alarmed. What could a small group of 168 foreigners possibly do against his vast empire and its mighty army? Rather than kill them on sight, Atahualpa decided to meet these peculiar visitors in person. He believed that these strangers posed no real threat and that it would be more interesting to see them and their strange animals up close. Atahualpa agreed to meet the Spaniards in the central plaza of Cajamarca. This was to be a ceremonial meeting between his empire and a group of lowly foreign visitors. On the morning of Saturday, November 16, 1532, Atahualpa entered the square, accompanied by 6,000 of his finest soldiers. The men were lightly armed, as no battle was expected. Atahualpa was supremely confident, having just heard of his great victory over Huáscar. He had captured his rival, secured the empire, and was on the cusp of a glorious coronation. This meeting with the Spaniards was a mere formality before he marched south to Cusco to solidify his rule. Little did Atahualpa know, this day would mark the beginning of the end for the mighty Inca Empire. Though the Spaniards were few in number, they were armed with steel weapons and gunpowder, technologies that the Inca had never seen before. As Atahualpa prepared to meet these strange foreigners, the stage was set for one of the most dramatic encounters in the history of the Americas. The fate of an empire hung in the balance, and the world of the Inca would soon be turned upside down. Pizarro and his men had a bold plan, one inspired by the tactics of Hernán Cortés in Mexico. Capture the leader of the empire and bring the entire civilization to its knees. The head of the Inca Empire, Atahualpa, was the supreme ruler, the Sapa Inca, and the empire could not function without him. Knowing this, Pizarro prepared an ambush. He hid his small force of conquistadors in the stone buildings surrounding the central plaza of Cajamarca, positioning his cannons and arquebuses on the far side of the square, ready to fire when the moment came. As the day faded and the sun began to set, the massive Inca forces filled the square. Like too many fans crammed into a tiny stadium, Atahualpa's men crowded into the confined space, with only two narrow exits in sight. But not a single Spaniard was visible. An eerie silence fell over the square, broken only by a faint breeze rustling through the plaza. The tension was unbearable for the Spaniards hiding inside the buildings. The fear was palpable. Pedro Pizarro, one of the conquistadors, later recalled that many of his comrades were so terrified that they urinated on themselves without even realizing it. Finally, two figures emerged from the buildings and approached Atahualpa. One was Vicente de Valverde, a Dominican friar, and the other was a native interpreter with little experience. Valverde stepped forward and began to read a proclamation known as the Requerimiento. It was a formal declaration from the Spanish crown, informing the native peoples of the New World of Spain's divine right to conquer their lands. He read, Atahualpa, I request and require you to recognize the Church as your mistress and as governess of the world and universe. And if you do not do this, with the help of God we shall come mightily against you, and we shall make war on you everywhere and in every way that we can. We shall subject you to the yoke and obedience of the Church and His Majesty, and we shall seize your women and children and make them slaves to sell and dispose of as His Majesty commands. And we shall do all the evil and damage to you that we are able. And I must insist that the deaths and destruction that result from this will be all your fault. This bizarre declaration, rooted in the Spanish belief of their divine mission, was incomprehensible to Atahualpa. To the Inca ruler, it was an act of supreme disrespect, completely disregarding the customs and diplomacy of his empire. Valverde then offered Atahualpa a Bible, a symbol of the Christian faith. Atahualpa had heard of the Spaniards' fascination with these objects, but he had no context for what it truly meant. Irritated by the foreigners' arrogance and growing disrespect, he scolded Valverde for the Spaniards' actions in the region, accusing them of stealing from Inca warehouses and killing his chiefs. Then, in a final gesture of defiance, Atahualpa tossed the Bible aside. Valverde, horrified by what he perceived as an act of blasphemy, ran back toward the stone buildings, shouting for the Spaniards to attack. He cried out, come out, Christians! Come at these enemy dogs who reject the things of God!" The square fell silent once again, but only for a moment. Suddenly, the roar of cannons and arquebuses filled the air, as Spanish artillery fired into the densely packed Inca troops. Thick smoke billowed from the cannons, and metal shrapnel tore through the mass of warriors. Shocked by the deafening sounds and chaos, the Inca soldiers had little time to react before the Spaniards charged. From their hiding places, the Spaniards rushed into the square screaming their war cry, "Santiago!" and attacking on horseback. The sight of mounted warriors, beasts unknown to the Inca, added to the panic. Atahualpa's lightly armed men were unprepared for the ferocity of the attack. Trapped in the confined space, the Inca soldiers frantically tried to flee through the narrow exits. It was impossible for most to escape, and thousands were trampled underfoot or cut down by the Spanish horses and swords. The litter carrying Atahualpa, held aloft by his attendants, was toppled, and Pizarro himself seized the Sapa Inca. Atahualpa, who had just that morning celebrated his victory over his brother, was now, as the sun set, a prisoner of the Spanish. The Inca Empire, already weakened by civil war and disease, now faced its most dire crisis. The capture of Atahualpa was a devastating blow, and the remaining Inca forces scattered into the countryside, leaderless and disorganized. As Atahualpa assessed the situation, he noted the Spaniards' particular interest in the gold trinkets they had found among the wreckage. To him, these foreign invaders seemed like pirates, interested only in plunder. Believing that he could buy his freedom, Atahualpa made an extraordinary offer. He promised to fill the room in which he was held captive with gold, And on top of that, fill it twice over with silver. Pizarro agreed, and over the next several months, the greatest treasures of the Inca Empire flowed into Cajamarca. Artifacts of immense cultural and religious significance were melted down into gold and silver ingots to satisfy the Spaniards' greed. As a result, very few Inca artifacts made of precious metals survive to this day, their cultural heritage destroyed in the fires of greed. By the time Atahualpa's ransom was fully delivered, the gold alone totaled 1.3 million pesos de oro, equivalent to around 400 million US dollars in 2018. But as the ransom was collected, the Spanish presence in the region grew stronger. Diego de Almagro, Pizarro's business partner and fellow conquistador, arrived with reinforcements, an additional 153 men. Though Atahualpa had fulfilled his part of the deal, the Spaniards now had the upper hand, and his fate was far from secure. The arrival of more Spanish reinforcements made it unmistakable to both the conquistadors and the Inca that this was no diplomatic mission, this was an invasion. The Spaniards had come not only to conquer, but to stay. Although Atahualpa had fulfilled his promise of delivering an immense ransom of gold and silver, Pizarro and his men realized that the Sapa Inca was no longer useful to them. If they allowed him to live, the chances of him organizing a rebellion were too great, and the Spaniards would face a well-coordinated resistance that they might not be able to defeat. On July 26, 1533, Atahualpa was brought into the main square of Cajamarca. He was tied to a wooden stake as the native population watched in disbelief. To them, Atahualpa wasn't just the supreme ruler of the Inca Empire, he was a god. Witnessing their living deity humiliated, restrained, and facing death must have shattered the Inca people's deeply ingrained worldview. The friar, Vicente de Valverde, who had offered Atahualpa a Bible during their first encounter, approached the captured emperor one last time. He presented Atahualpa with a grim choice: accept baptism and die a Christian, or refuse and be burned alive. For Atahualpa, the prospect of being burned was the ultimate horror. In Inca belief, his body had to be preserved after death to ensure his passage into the afterlife. If his body were destroyed by fire, his spiritual journey would be incomplete, and he would be denied his place among the revered ancestors. Faced with this terrible fate, Atahualpa accepted the friar's offer. He was quickly baptized into the Christian faith, receiving the name Francisco in his final moments. But his conversion did not save him from death. He was strangled to death by the Spanish, now regarded as a Christian martyr. After the execution, the Spanish wasted no time. They left Cajamarca and set out on the long march toward Cusco, the heart of the Inca Empire. As they left behind the square where Atahualpa had been killed, the conquistadors must have felt that victory was already within their grasp. They had captured the Inca god king, amassed untold wealth in gold and silver, and now Cusco lay before them. But the conquest of the Inca Empire was far from over. Atahualpa's body, partially burned, was hastily buried in a shallow ditch near Cajamarca. With his death, the empire he once ruled now belonged to Francisco Pizarro and his brothers. As they marched toward Cusco, Pizarro encountered Atahualpa's teenage brother, Manco Inca Yupanqui, and quickly installed him as a puppet ruler. The Spanish, now controlling the empire through Manco Inca, were welcomed into Cusco not as conquerors but as liberators, due in part to their role in ending the destructive civil war that had plagued the empire for years. This new Inca-Spanish alliance quickly crushed the remaining factions loyal to Atahualpa. With Cusco now firmly under their control and Manco Inca as their figurehead, Pizarro and his conquistadors could establish a new political order. The massive empire known as Tahuantinsuyu was transformed into the Spanish colony of Nueva Castilla, New Castile. The conquistadors, most of whom had come to the New World as poor, illiterate soldiers, were now among the wealthiest men in the Americas. Lands and titles were distributed, and encomiendas, grants that gave the Spanish control over the labor and resources of the native population, were handed out to Pizarro's men. Manco Inca's coronation in Cusco marked a new era for the empire. However, both Pizarro and his key lieutenant, Diego de Almagro, soon left the city to pursue their separate ambitions. Pizarro headed to the coast to found a new city, which would become Lima, the future capital of Spanish Peru. Meanwhile, tensions simmered between Pizarro and Almagro. The two men had once been close partners, But Almagro was increasingly frustrated. He was outraged that Pizarro had been named the sole governor of Peru by the Spanish crown, a position that made Pizarro the de facto ruler of the newly conquered lands. To make matters worse, Pizarro had refused to share Atahualpa's enormous ransom with Almagro and his men. Feeling slighted and angry, Almagro decided to strike out on his own. He gathered a force of 570 Spanish cavalry and foot soldiers, along with 12,000 native troops, and set his sights on conquering the southern part of the Inca Empire, what is now modern-day Chile. His goal was to carve out his own realm, separate from Pizarro's authority, and gain the wealth and power he felt he deserved. But while the Spanish were beginning to squabble over their newfound wealth and territory, the conquest of the Inca Empire was far from settled. With Francisco Pizarro and Diego de Almagro having left Cusco, the Inca capital was now under the control of Manco Inca and Pizarro's younger brothers, Juan and Gonzalo Pizarro. Manco Inca, the puppet ruler placed on the throne by the Spanish, began efforts to rebuild his shattered empire, which had been ravaged by civil war and the deadly smallpox epidemic. Yet any hope of cooperation between the Inca and their Spanish conquerors soon evaporated. The Pizarro brothers had no respect for the alliance or Manco Inca's authority. They relentlessly harassed him for more gold, silver, and native women, treating him not as a king, but as a mere subordinate. Gonzalo Pizarro's actions were especially egregious. He kidnapped and raped Manco Inca's wife, Cura Ocolo, an act of deep insult and dishonor to the Inca ruler. Manco Inca, realizing that his title of Sapa Inca came at the price of humiliation and oppression, reached a breaking point. He had made a devastating bargain, accepting the title of emperor, but with no real power to protect his people or uphold their dignity. His bitterness deepened when the Pizarro brothers imprisoned and beat him. By early November 1535, just 2 years after the execution of his brother Atahualpa, Manco Inca began to quietly plot rebellion. In a secret meeting with the Inca nobility, Manco delivered a passionate speech to his fellow chiefs. He questioned the Spaniards' right to dominate their people, stating, "I ask you, where did we wrong them? What do we owe them? Which one of them did we injure so that they waged such cruel war on us with their horses and iron weapons? It seems neither just nor honest to allow this any longer. We should fight to the death or kill our cruel enemies." With this powerful call to arms, Manco Inca set the wheels of rebellion into motion. He fled Cusco and took refuge in the rugged Andes Mountains, far from the reach of the Spanish. His escape was followed by the reactivation of the once formidable Inca war machine. Chasqui, the empire's swift-foot messengers, spread word of the uprising to every corner of Tahuantinsuyu. The message was clear. The Inca would no longer submit to foreign rule. Across the empire, native chiefs responded to Manco's call, launching small-scale attacks on isolated Spanish settlements. Feudal lords who had been living comfortably in their newly acquired palaces and estates were lured into ambushes and clubbed to death by the very people they had oppressed. In just a few months, more Spaniards died in these ambushes than had been killed in the entire initial conquest of the Inca Empire. The rebellion was spreading, and Manco's forces were growing. Meanwhile, in Cusco and Lima, the news of the rebellion sent shockwaves through the Spanish. The full might of the Inca Empire was beginning to reassemble. From mountain fortresses and distant valleys, soldiers emerged, arming themselves with clubs, axes, spears, and halberds as they prepared to march under Manco's banner. By early May 1536, Manco Inca had amassed a massive army, reportedly numbering around 100,000 soldiers. These troops, many of whom were seasoned warriors, slowly converged on Cusco, the symbolic heart of the empire. The Pizarro brothers, Juan and Gonzalo, found themselves trapped in the city along with 196 Spanish soldiers, a handful of African slaves, native allies, and some mestiza women. The city, once a glittering symbol of Inca power and wealth, was now about to become the epicenter of a violent clash between the Inca and their Spanish conquerors. On the morning of Saturday, May 6, 1536, the sounds of conch shell trumpets echoed through the mountains surrounding Cusco. A barrage of javelins, rocks, and arrows rained down on the city, darkening the sky. Manco Inca's army, wielding massive spears and clubs, began their slow but steady descent from the hillsides, encircling the city. The relentless onslaught forced the Spanish defenders to scramble for cover. Inca warriors stormed into Cusco, pushing the Spaniards into a desperate retreat. Juan and Gonzalo Pizarro, along with the remaining Spanish soldiers, took refuge in two buildings located in the main plaza of the city. The Spaniards were vastly outnumbered, but Manco Inca understood from past battles that his soldiers' weapons were ineffective against the Spanish, particularly their armor and cavalry. No matter how brave or strong the Inca warriors were, their stone and bronze weapons couldn't penetrate Spanish steel armor. The only way to defeat a Spaniard in combat was to knock them from their horse or land a precise blow to the face. The battle for Cusco was far from over, and Manco Inca knew that the Spaniards, though trapped, were still dangerous. The siege had begun, but whether the Inca could fully reclaim their capital remained uncertain. Manco Inca's strategy during the siege of Cusco was simple but effective. Tighten the noose around the Spaniards trapped within the city and eventually overwhelm them with superior numbers. The Spaniards, panicked and disoriented, darted between two buildings they had transformed into makeshift bunkers. Hernando Pizarro did his best to issue commands and strengthen their defenses, but the Inca onslaught was relentless. As the Spanish scrambled to organize a proper defense, disaster struck. The roofs of their buildings caught fire. Inca slingers and archers were hurling red-hot stones and shooting flaming arrows into the city, creating an inferno. Smoke filled the air, suffocating the Spaniards, while burning beams fell from the ceiling, spreading fresh embers throughout the buildings. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, the flames were miraculously extinguished. According to some Spaniards, the Virgin Mary herself descended from heaven to put out the fire, a divine intervention. However, Inca chronicles tell a different story. It was the African slaves stationed on the rooftops who managed to extinguish the flames under a hail of arrows and stones. Despite the constant attacks, the Spaniards' armor and cavalry allowed them to hold their ground. Though the Inca warriors continued to press against the Spanish defenses, they struggled to pierce through the steel armor of the invaders or survive a cavalry charge. Manco Inca's forces swarmed the city but were unable to break through the Spaniards' fortified positions. By the end of the day, the Inca had to cease their attacks and barricade the streets they had managed to seize. From his command center in the nearby town of Calca, Manco was confident that within a few days, his soldiers would storm the Spanish holdouts and claim victory. However, the siege of Cusco dragged on for months and new strategies were needed. The Inca warriors began tearing apart the roads and streets to neutralize the Spanish cavalry. They staged feigned retreats down narrow alleys, luring the horsemen into ambushes. The bolas, a traditional Inca hunting weapon, was introduced to trip up the legs of charging horses. Despite their efforts, the battle for Cusco was brutal and devastating. Entire sections of the city were reduced to ashes as Spanish cavalry charged through narrow streets, leaving a trail of destruction. One Spanish eyewitness later wrote, "The Incas waged such a fierce attack that the Spaniards thought themselves 1,000 times lost." While the siege of Cusco continued, Manco Inca had another plan in motion. He had sent his finest general, Quisquis, to confront Francisco Pizarro, who was stationed in Lima. Quisquis was a brilliant tactician who understood that meeting the Spanish cavalry on open ground was a recipe for disaster. Instead, he used the rugged Andean terrain to his advantage, only engaging the Spaniards in steep, narrow passes where cavalry charges were impossible. His forces would block the exits and rain boulders down on the horses and soldiers trapped below. Quisquis' strategy was devastatingly effective. Over the course of several months, he managed to destroy 4 separate Spanish relief forces, wiping out hundreds of soldiers and sending their weapons and armor back to Manco Inca as trophies. Francisco Pizarro, once the conqueror of the mighty Inca Empire, was now in a state of panic. He had just lost more than 100 horsemen to Quisquis' forces and was left with only a few dozen soldiers to defend Lima. His brother Juan Pizarro was dead. Cusco was besieged, and more than a third of his forces had been annihilated. The empire he had thought was under his control was slipping away. Buoyed by Quisquis' victories, Manco Inca made a fatal miscalculation. He ordered Quisquis to march on Lima and destroy the city. While Cusco was a highland fortress surrounded by mountains, Lima was built on flat coastal plains and was well fortified. Quisquis's tactics, which relied on using the terrain to neutralize cavalry charges, would not work in the open flatlands of Lima. Yet bound by his emperor's orders, Quisquis launched repeated assaults on the city, only to be beaten back each time. The Inca general was well aware that Manco Inca needed him back in Cusco, where his leadership and expertise could have been crucial to the ongoing siege. But his emperor's command was clear. Lima had to fall. On the sixth day of the siege of Lima, Quisquis led yet another charge. His army marched across the plain, advancing toward the city's gates. With his lance in hand, Quisquis and his hand-picked vanguard charged into the city. But this time, they were met with a deadly volley of arquebus fire. The thunderous crack of the Spanish guns was followed by a fierce cavalry charge. As the dust settled and the smoke cleared, the Inca army saw their revered general lying dead on the battlefield, a Spanish lance piercing his heart. The death of Quisquis was a devastating blow to the Inca resistance. With their greatest general gone, the Inca soldiers abandoned the siege of Lima and retreated into the mountains. Francisco Pizarro, now freed from the threat of the Inca army, quickly regrouped and prepared to deal with the remaining forces in Cusco. While Manco Inca's rebellion had shaken the Spanish grip on the Andes, the loss of Quisquis marked a turning point. The balance of power was slowly shifting back into the hands of the conquistadors. The war for the Inca Empire was far from over, but the tide was turning once more in favor of the Spaniards. The siege of Cusco dragged on relentlessly for 10 long months. Messages from across the Inca Empire arrived breathlessly at Manco Inca's command post. The news was grim. General Quisquis was dead, having fallen in battle outside Lima. Pizarro was fast approaching Cusco with renewed strength, bolstered by the return of Diego de Almagro, who had been defeated in Chile but had returned with a sizable army. In addition, Spanish reinforcements were pouring in from the north. Manco Inca, whose fortunes had only recently seemed promising, now saw the tide turning against him. The reality was clear. The siege of Cusco had failed. After holding out for nearly a year, Manco knew that the situation had become unsustainable. His chiefs and captains were summoned, and in a somber meeting, Manco informed them of the difficult decision he had reached. They would abandon Cusco. With a heavy heart, Manco ceded his capital, his treasures, and the heart of the Inca Empire to the Spaniards. He ordered a retreat into the distant remote region of Vilcabamba, a dense and isolated area of rainforest that lay within the bounds of the Inca Empire. In Vilcabamba, Manco hoped to regroup, rebuild, and perhaps one day rise again to challenge the invaders. As Manco and his followers retreated deep into the rainforest, they carried with them not only the remnants of their army and court, but also the sacred mummies of the past Sapa Incas, the former rulers of the empire. Among the mummies was his father, Huayna Capac, the emperor who had ruled the Inca Empire at its height, and his great-great-grandfather Pachacuti, the legendary emperor who had founded the empire itself. From Vilcabamba, Manco Inca began a fierce guerrilla campaign against the Spanish. His soldiers struck in the dead of night, ambushing Spanish supply convoys, raiding newly established colonial towns, and stealing horses and weapons. Then, like ghosts, they would disappear back into the safety of the rainforest. Over time, Manco's men learned to ride horses, fire Spanish guns, and even craft Spanish-style weapons. They became adept at using the conquistadors' own tactics against them. However, as the years passed, the situation became increasingly bleak. The Spanish population in Peru grew rapidly, almost doubling each year, and their grip on the Andes became more unshakable. Manco Inca, now older and wearier, realized that while his rebellion might ensure his own survival, the Inca Empire as it had been, the vast Tawantinsuyu, or Land of Four Quarters, was gone forever. The dream of restoring the Inca state to its former glory had faded. Even as the Pizarro brothers met their ends in violent and dramatic ways, Diego de Almagro was killed in a civil war against the Pizarros, Francisco Pizarro was assassinated, Hernando Pizarro languished in a Spanish prison, and Gonzalo Pizarro was executed on the orders of the Spanish king. The Inca state clung to a fragile existence in the jungles of Vilcabamba. Manco's resistance, though diminished, continued. It wasn't until 1572, 36 years after Manco Inca's initial rebellion, that the last chapter of the Inca Empire was finally closed. Manco's son, Tupac Amaru, became the final Sapa Inca and the last hope of his people. but the Spanish eventually found and captured him. In a final, symbolic blow to the once great empire of Pachacuti, Tupac Amaru was executed by the Spanish. With his death, the Inca state was extinguished, and the empire of Pachacuti was erased from history. The story of the Inca people, their rulers, and their rebellion came to an end, leaving behind a legacy of defiance and resistance that would be remembered for centuries to come. If you enjoyed this, like and consider subscribing to be notified on future videos.